get started. Hi everybody, welcome to 101. I'm your host DJ Placebo. This is part of the Bad Radio Show every Wednesday from 8 to 10 a.m. I'm joined here by Dustin Sigsbee. Do you want to give a little bit of background information about yourself, who you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thank you for having me on. So as Bella just mentioned, my name is Dustin Sigsbee. I'm an instructor here at the University of South Carolina. I'm originally from Michigan, so this warm weather is really not something that I'm accustomed to. We're very used to having a lot of snow and dealing with icy roads and stuff like that. So come from a very small town, total of 800 people, so it is very much just like a stoplight. Somehow I made it here to Columbia. Back in Michigan, I did my undergrad at Central Michigan University. And I studied philosophy there with a minor in political science. At the time, I was really interested in political philosophy and just ethics in general. After that, I went to Western Michigan University. They have a really great terminal master's program for philosophy, so I studied there for 2 years and got my master's in philosophy, mainly focusing in epistemology and ethics. So epistemology, for those of you who don't know, is the study of knowledge. Ethics, more people are familiar with. After that, I took a sort of a break from my own personal education, and I taught at a community college for a few years. It was a fantastic experience, but it made me want to get back into educating myself. So I applied here to the PhD program and was accepted, I think 5 years ago now. So I'm a fifth year PhD student in the Department of Philosophy. My main area of focus is still roughly ethics and not so much epistemology anymore. So that's a little bit about my background and why I'm here in South Carolina.
So I know this is going to be really hard because philosophy is probably one of the most complex and difficult to understand conceptual things ever. And that is a very objective opinion.
Certainly.
If you could summarize your field in 2 sentences, how would you do so?
That's right. So my my snarky response to this is very carefully. I often start off my introductory to philosophy classes by saying there's no good definition for what philosophy is. If you want what I think is one of the better definitions, it's something that you'll usually find on a college departmental website, and it'll say something like the following: philosophy is the study of values, reality, knowledge, logic, and reason. And it's like, I think that roughly captures what philosophy is. I'd say something like inquiry into the basic aspects of human existence, but there's so many different other disciplines that also examine those same things.
Yeah.
So it would not be appropriate to define philosophy in that way, because it would also be consistent with these other fields as well. So.
Yeah.
So I think just compartmentalizing it in terms of the study of values, knowledge, reason, and reality is a good way of defining philosophy in a quick and less contentious way.
Yeah. So
that was more than 2 sentences, but...
Yeah, but like, it's philosophy, so I don't think it wouldn't have been possible. I don't think it's really possible for like any field of study. I mean,
it is,
but
yeah.
It's fine. I like to challenge people, so...
It was a challenging question, for sure.
So what drew you to philosophy specifically?
Yeah, so I really liked thinking about this question. There's like so much that actually drew me to philosophy, but the very first thing, I remember that I was studying, I said I went to undergrad and I majored in philosophy and I minored in political science. I was actually majoring in political science before I had ever, really considered taking a philosophy class or even getting into philosophy. And I took this philosophy class as, it's gen ed, covers requirements, and I remember going in, and one of the first things that we talked about was arguments for the existence of God.
Oh my
and I was like, oh my God, this is so fascinating, right? Because it's like, as a kid, I grew up in a very, what I took to be a normal household. My parents, my grandparents, and family members professed to be religious individuals, yet they couldn't really answer a lot of the questions that I had. They also didn't seem to engage in religious what's the right word?
Debates? maybe?
Nah, I mean, like, they didn't attend church, right?
Oh,
Like,
okay, never
they-
mind.
You know, so for instance, you know, part of my family is Catholic, but they would never go to mass, right?
Mhm.
And so they didn't, you know, even though they consider themselves to be religious, it wasn't something that I could really openly talk with them about. And so,
Yeah.
like, here was this, like, deep dive into one of the most fundamental aspects of, like, why people, you know, pursue religion, which I
Mhm.
take as, like, you know, how did all of this stuff come to be in the first place, right? And there's obviously,
Yeah.
like, scientific answers to that as well, but I think, you know, just contemplating, you know, the existence of God and, like, how the world could have been brought into being is such a, like, a profound question that, you know, once we started talking about that, I was kind of hooked, right? And then we got into,
Yeah.
like, free will and
Oh,
all this other
goodness.
stuff, and it was just like, oh my gosh. So it was really Matthew Cates's introductory philosophy class at Central Michigan University that convinced me that this was, like, this is the area that I really want to get into. And I immediately signed up as a minor because it was really, really quick, and it took more paperwork to sign up as a major, but I very quickly went through the extra paperwork to get signed up as a major because
Yeah.
almost instantly fell in love, you know, with these really, really what I took to be fundamental questions.
Just like light topics.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah,
just
yeah.
Small talk.
Yeah. But very important small talk.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
So currently, what's your favorite thing about studying philosophy?
Man, I have to say it's diversity. You know, there's so many different questions to ask, and there's so many different ways to answer those questions, that you can get a really diverse set of, like, not only, like, ways of asking a particular question, but then also ways of answering the question. And I think having someone else's perspective on how you should be asking and answering these questions is so helpful. And I think, like, oftentimes because this diversity, like, kind of scares people, right? Because
Mhm.
sometimes you know, other people don't think about these questions and answers in the same way that you might, right? And so it can be really scary to hear, like, how other people are approaching these things. But for me, it's always been like, you know, I want to try to learn as much about the world as I can, and the various people inside of it. And so, like, one of the things that I think is really important is just figuring out how other people think about these really important topics. So I think
Yeah.
that's, like, it's the diversity there that's, like, really I really find valuable.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Just like the opportunity to know, like, really deeply how people think, and it's always going to be so different. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think taking time to you know, really think through other people's perspectives can help us. Even if you just want to use it as, like, a self-help thing, it can really help us think about our own perspectives as
Yeah,
well, right?
have like
So,
a little more empathy too.
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So do you have any current projects you're working on? Like, what's your focus right now?
So I'm working on my dissertation, and if any of your viewers have ever heard anything from someone dissertating, this is the first piece of advice. Don't ever ask them about their dissertation.
I'm so sorry.
It is not. It is a source of constant stress
Oh, I'm so sorry.
for PhD students. So no, this is the advice. I still think it's good to talk about this stuff. Yes, I'm currently working on my dissertation, and I think we'll talk a little bit later about, like, what specifically the dissertation focuses on.
Mhm.
But that's my big project right now is the dissertation. I've also, I guess this is another thing. It's not really. I've also joined the IACUC on campus, which is the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee,
Okay.
that you know, oversees all of the animal experimentation on campus. So this is another,
Okay.
like, really big thing that I have going on that you know, it's not my dissertation, but it's still very, very important to me. So
No, I've learned about IACUC before in my research methods class.
there you go.
Because my professor was working on, like, HIV in rats,
Mm-hmm.
and she was saying how IACUC, like, oversees everything,
Yep.
and these rats are the most well taken care of rats you will ever find.
Yeah, there are.
Even
yes.
if they're being given HIV. Everything else in their life is amazing.
Right, yes. So if you just cut out the HIV part...
they are so well taken care of.
Yes.
So why do you think that the field of philosophy is important? Why do you think that the everyday person should care about it?
So I don't know that they should.
Really?
I mean, here are a couple of reasons to maybe find philosophy valuable, right? And of course, like, philosophers are going to find it valuable, right? Individually, I think that knowledge is intrinsically valuable, right? So having knowledge is not valuable because it helps you then get something else, right? Like a job or money or whatever. It's just valuable to have in and of itself. And so I tend to think all academic pursuits, not just philosophy, fall into this kind of importance. So, part of why neurology is really important is not because it's part of it is because of the practical applications, right? It helps people's lives. But another thing is just like it's important for us to know stuff, and it's valuable to know stuff. So I think like even if a field isn't practically valuable, it can be valuable in other sorts of ways. So there's that. But then additionally, I don't know that people should care about it, but I do think that they can get practical value from it.
Yeah.
Right? So one of the things that philosophy, there's two things that we really try to do. One of them is clearly articulate our ideas so that we can convey it to other people. So that's really, really important. Another thing that it does is it tries to help us figure out how to reason properly.
Yeah.
And proper reasoning is something that is of practical importance no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
Right? So even if you're not studying, formal academic philosophy, you still need to know how to think through your everyday actions, or like how you should be thinking about things in the long term, right? Trying to avoid fallacies, making sure that all of your beliefs are founded on good reasons, that you're trying to get rid of any false beliefs that you have. And so I think in addition to just the intrinsic value of knowledge, philosophy is important in large part because it has this really strong practical value that a lot of people actually overlook. So that's what I would say. So I don't know if they need to care about it, but it does have these practical things that are beneficial to non-philosophers.
No, I completely agree. So I hate to talk about a sore subject, but could you just tell us maybe a little bit about your dissertation, maybe what drew you to it?
Yeah, so, right.
Explain it in just 2 sentences. I'm just kidding. You can say as much as
you want. So, here's the short version. There are many ethicists who think that the mark of a good normative theory, or a theory about like what we should be doing and how we should be acting, is marked by impartiality, which is the notion that we treat everybody the same without favoring our interests or the interests of some other individuals, right? This is a hallmark of justice, actually, right? Like, justice is supposed to be fairness and impartially applied, right? So if your theory is impartial, in other words, if you're giving extra weight to particular interests, many people saw this as a flaw. However, there's been some recent pushback on this, particularly with regards to the relationships that we have with other people, right? So some philosophers have now tried to develop approaches that take our relationships with other individuals seriously in a moral sense. And this is a way of being partial. So my dissertation focuses on the ethics of partiality. So it says, like, okay, let's assume that we've got good reason to give the weight of those with whom we share special relationships more, their interests more weight than the interests of people that we don't share those relationships with. What would that look like in terms of our ethical commitments to other individuals? So most people have only looked at this in terms of humans. So Bernard Williams is one of the biggest proponents of this, and he has only considered humans. So I'm trying to take that idea and apply it to animals. So recently, so much earlier than the 1970s, but particularly in the 1970s, animal ethics got a really big start with Peter Singer and Tom Regan, and so people started really taking our ethical obligations to animals seriously. And so because this is sort of a newer area, not many people, almost none from what I can find in my own research, try to take the ethics of partiality and see what it would look like for our relationships with animals. So the first part of my dissertation focuses on the special relationships that we have with animal companions.
Yeah.
So currently, that's like as far as it's gotten, but I've got a lot of other special relationships in mind that I also would like to analyze through the ethics of partiality, but that might be something to do after the dissertation. So that wasn't 2 minutes or 2 sentences. If I had to say, it's roughly, I'm applying the idea that we should treat those who are closer to us better to animals. That's the rough idea.
That's simple.
Yeah.
I mean, also very complicated because it's philosophy.
It gets super complicated. Yeah.
So just to end with, what do you think are some of the most common misconceptions about the field of philosophy?
Yeah, so when I thought about this, I was like, I don't know if there are any common misconceptions because nobody seems to know what philosophy that it even is. Right? So like, I'll ask people, you know, they'll say like, oh, I don't really have any conception of what philosophy is.
Yeah.
Right? For those who do, I've often run into, so like here's the one big misconception. Philosophers are constantly just like held up in an ivory tower, you know, constantly just like reading and by themselves, sitting in an armchair, like detached from, you know, practical goings-ons. And that is just not correct at all, right? So philosophers do spend a lot of time reading and writing. As like mainly what we do, reading and writing. But also, philosophy couldn't proceed without a lot of dialogue. So one of the main things that we're actually doing as philosophers is constantly dialoguing with each other. And then additionally, many philosophers used to kind of stay out of practical matters, as it were. But recently, philosophers are getting involved in all of these things that people in, for instance, the STEM field are getting involved in. So I was talking about my involvement with the IACUC earlier, right? This is like not only of scientific interest to me, but it's also a philosophical interest as well. And so philosophers will tend to do the sorts of things that I'm doing, right? So if you're, for instance, studying philosophy of mind, I bring up neurology, like God knows how many times during this interview, right? But if you're studying philosophy of mind, it would make complete sense for you to go and get a good academic background on neurology, right? Like you don't want to just stay in philosophy, right? You need to see what other people, this is part of like the other perspective stuff, right? It's like you gotta go out and like see what's actually happening, right? Otherwise what you're talking about is just not going to be applicable to reality, right? So I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions is that, you know, what we do is sort of like done behind closed doors, alone, has no practical applicability. We're really just sort of talking to ourselves or amongst ourselves. I don't think that's true at all. So,
it's really more hands-on, or at least it should be.
It should be. Yeah, I think it's definitely it should be. If it's not, so this is me telling all the other philosophers listening. Get out
I'm
there.
sure we have so many listening.
Yeah, do your field work.
Well, thank you so much. This has been so much fun.
Thank you for having me.
This has been 101. I'm your host, DJ Placebo. Thank you to our guest, Dustin Sigsbee.
Thank you, everybody.
Amazing. That was so much fun.
Yeah.